In this video I'm going to try and describe my hypothesis on how Tesla's special generator operates. It is first reported to us by only one source, William Lyne, spelled L-Y-N-E, in his book Pentagon Aliens, or the earlier edition Space Aliens from the Pentagon. And most of the time he talks about the government cover-up of UFOs technology that we possess by creating a fabricated story of aliens. Oh, it's all the aliens' fault. Blame it on the aliens. And creating a fiction of aliens' existence or our relationship with them to mask the idea that we got it from the Germans. The Germans got it from their own development, but Tesla predates them all to have originated it. And he had a lot of things stolen from him as it is, such as the liquefaction of air, and that will be, I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's part of this little storyline. So apparently Tesla was very short on funding, according to William Lyne. And in the 1930s he contracted with Werner von Braun to come over here before the war in New Mexico and taught him the fine art of various technologies, one of which was the neutron bomb and another one was, if I can remember now what it was, UFO levitational technology, because Tesla had already had a working proof of that around 1899 or 1891 or 1894, I believe, proof of concept. It was a converted iron potbelly stove that he converted over to a one-man UFO craft that he flew around New York out of his laboratory window, upper-story apartment building, and made nightly runs. Well, let's see if I can move forward on this. So Tesla also worked with a Mr. Dort, whose son related this story secondhand to William Lyne, who of course now has it third hand and relates it to us, we're fourth hand, that there was another technology that Tesla had worked on, or shared with the Germans I should say, which helped them convert their U-boats, some of them, a limited number, into a fleet of electro-powered U-boats. But the power generated for the electric motor of those U-boats was not atomic power, and it was not steam power. It was a power, Tesla called it his special generator. Nowadays we call it his tri-metal generator, but he never called it that because it had the structural geometry of three different metals that were required in its operation, namely copper, aluminum, and iron. And according to William Lyne, the older style electromechanical watt-hour meter, pre-digital watt-hour meter, exemplifies in a very rudimentary, extremely rudimentary format some of the main points of Tesla's special generator. Now, that is because we should really fundamentally go back to the days of Michael Faraday and his invention of his Faraday disk, or homopolar disk, or homopolar generator, or homopolar motor, inasmuch as there's a lot of similarities among all these items of interest. But what really got me going, after I'd already gone on Bruce DePalma's website and a few others discussing the fine points of a homopolar generator or homopolar disk, the main thing being that you don't have to spin the magnetic field in order to generate a current. You need you need not spin the magnetic field relative to the I don't know if I want to say electric field, the disk, the electrostatic disk, because there are usually two components. You've got a non-ferrous metallic disk, usually copper or aluminum. In the watt-hour meter, there's an aluminum disk that spins. And then you have a magnetic field, but the important thing is the magnetic field need not spin or need not spin relative to the disk. So it can remain stationary relative to the disk, it can counterspin relative to the disk, it can spin with the disk. It doesn't matter what you do with the permanent magnet, the field generated by the permanent magnet, or the field, or if it's generated by an electromagnet for that matter. It doesn't matter whether it spins relative to the disk or not, the aluminum or copper disk. But you got to have a magnetic field, and you've got to have a non-ferromagnetic disk spinning in a magnetic field, the magnetic field of which either spins or doesn't spin, doesn't matter. And if you measure current, or voltage difference if you prefer, between the periphery, the circumference of the disk, and the center, you'll see a difference, and you can create a current. Now, so then we get to the real eye popper, and that is tornadoes. Nobody still yet to this day understands fully how tornadoes operate, unless the only person who seems to know the most amount of information about tornadoes, and that is his hypothesization of what, in addition to what we know, is the person by the name of Charles Chandler, spelled Chandler, and he has a website, charleschandler.org. There's a hyphen in between his two names, and then he has a dissertation on the order of a thesis, like a master's or a PhD thesis. It's very, very well documented, thoroughly spelled out. He even gives it to you in 3 formats: abstract or moderate or full text. Something like, oh God, and his references is huge. Anyway, to boil down what he says, leads me to conclude that a homopolar disk and a tornado are one and the same, functionally speaking. The difference is, in a homopolar disk, in a tornado, the homopolar disk is substituted for a spinning mass of air, bottlenecked, squeezed at the base of a tornado. Actually, we have 2 tornadoes here. There's one here and one here. So let's go to this one. Because the other thing that Charles Chandler points out is that the lightning bolts that go from above and downwards do not send current through the earth. No current gets conducted through the earth. So it's not equalizing voltage differences between the upper atmosphere in the vicinity of the storm cloud and the ground of the earth itself. Instead, what is actually happening, according to his hypothetical rendition of the situation, is that it's the air mass at the base of the tornado, sitting right above the ground, that is receiving, or sending, as you prefer, the lightning bolt that's equalizing the charge difference between the 2 areas of air masses. So it's 2 air masses that are discharging one into the other, and the earth is not involved at all. This is significant because it helps to elucidate that the earth is there to serve a purpose. I mean, it does have a weak magnetic field, next to the earth. But the phenomenon of the tornado is non-electromagnetic. In fact, if an electromagnetic component were to be imposed upon, or an electromagnetic influence were to be imposed upon a tornado, the whole thing would get snuffed out. It's purely an electrostatic phenomenon, devoid of electromagnetic characteristics. For the most part, that's the dominant characteristic, is electrostatic. But we've also got an air mass that tends to heat. Now, interestingly enough, some of the analysis of a homopolar disk or homopolar generator is such that if you try to run it and you don't run it correctly and it starts to lose efficiency of current flow, that loss of efficiency will translate into the creation, or manifestation if you prefer, of heat. So all of these little indications are telling me that tornadoes and homopolar disks or generators are one and the same phenomenon. They're just being expressed differently. One is a little device made by man by comparison to that made by Mother Nature, which is humongous. Now there's another reference, and that is Dr. Judy Wood. She analyzed 9/11 as a forensic research scientist and concluded that the Hutchinson effect of John Hutchinson was at work, because she asked the question, where did the towers go? She wrote a book on the subject, and she's selling it on Amazon. And she has a website by the same name, Where Did the Towers Go? Well, they dustified, according to her. They turned into dust and blew away. So she says two things happened. How or why or who is not of her concern. Well, the how is, but not the who and the why. The how is... Sorry. The how is... Well, I better make sure that doesn't come back on again to distract us. The how is you set up an electrostatic field first, and then you send various radio waves through the field, and their cross interference with each other within the domain of the electrostatic field will create the Hutchinson effect. And all of the indications of the Hutchinson effect and all of the phenomenon of 9/11 concur enough to convince Dr. Judy Wood that that is what happened, that somebody brought the towers down, but they didn't use detonation charges inside the building necessarily. What was really significant is that the antenna on one of the twin towers fell to the ground intact, and very little of the building was left remaining at ground level. There should have been a pile, but it's not there. It just blew away. But one of the things that did not blow away and turn to dust is the antenna. So I suspect there was an electrostatic field generated by the antenna and the earth, encompassing the entire building, and then all that was needed was to pass certain radio frequency beams into that electrostatic field to bring down the towers. And one of the indications that there was something electrical going on, not detonation, was the fact that the people who jumped out of the buildings blew up. Just like if you put your little Fluffy in the microwave, your little pet Fluffy, your Fluffy would blow up. And the steel girders that rimmed the exterior of the twin tower, as they peeled away, they never reached the ground. In most cases, they turned to dust in midair as they fell. So, getting back to... And she also, Dr. Judy Wood also determined, in looking at the geologic data, or the atmospheric data, atmospheric pictures from satellite images, because she looked to see where the dust went, and she found that there was a hurricane off the coast of Manhattan that was moving in for the prior week into Manhattan, and there was also a tornado air mass west of Manhattan moving towards Manhattan, kind of a pincher effect. And she believes that hurricanes are an electrostatic phenomenon. Okay. Well, here Charles Chandler is saying the same thing, that a tornado is an electrostatic phenomenon. And he's locating the intensity at the base where it's bottlenecked. And that is where I would put our homopolar disk at its most provocative embodiment, where the charge is the greatest, at the base of the tornado. Now, people have said that tornadoes sometimes seek out aluminum frame buildings, especially if it's aluminum on the outside and organic material on the inside, a kind of reverse orgone wrapping, as if the structures are begging to be exploded. And I actually watched a video on YouTube yesterday as I was looking at various tornado videos of people. There was this helicopter pilot who took, I think it was a news program. At any rate, it was a video photographer up in a helicopter a mile away, and watched as this tornado moved across the landscape directly for a bunch of aluminum hangars at an airport, and just shredded the hangars and all the planes inside of it, as if it was attracted to it. So it seems that a tornado is an intelligent electrostatic phenomenon. Well, in my endeavor to try to understand Tesla's trimetal generator, his special generator, this is the best I've been able to come up with, but it's a lot better than anything I've been able to come up with before, except I have retained a few elements of my prior hypothetical design elements. They seem to stick, and that is one of which is the function of iron. So let's move to an image of Tesla's trimetal generator, if I can find one. Alright. Now what I imagine here is an iron tube lined with something that's dielectrical, let's say ceramic or glass. Now according to William Line, there's an aluminum piston that reciprocates a mere 1/16 of an inch very quickly on the inside. And so I suspect it's somewhere in the ultrasonic range, tens of thousands of cycles per second. That's my guess. And that there are two coils of wire of copper winding at either end of the iron tube. And there are two exhaust vents, one on either side of the aluminum piston, spaced such that as the aluminum piston moves a mere 1/16 of an inch back and forth, one vent will be open and the other will be closed, and then it'll alternate based on the movement of the piston back and forth. Furthermore, at either end at each end of the tube, there's an inlet. So that we've got two inlet ports and two outlet ports. The two inlet ports, each one is known as a vortex tube. You look it up on Wikipedia. It's a specific device that we feed compressed air in such a way tangential to the interior of the tube, such that the air coming into the tube is forced to circulate in the shape of a vortex. So in this case, it would enter at the end, start spinning, and move towards the center. And in the case of a vortex tube, you split it, though, in two directions. So what I don't show here is that the cold half is leaving to the right, in the case of the right end, while the hot air is moving inward to the inside. Because a vortex tube has two valves, the most significant of which is at the hot end, which is conical shaped, forcing the air in the center of the tube to be blocked from exiting the tube, and only the air at the periphery, which will be hotter than the air in the center, and thus lighter, or is it heavier? Heavier, and thus get thrown by centrifugal force to the exterior of the inside of the tube, and is only that air molecules is allowed to leave, and so you've got basically a separator based on temperature of air molecules. So you can have hot air coming out one end and cold air coming out of the other. The significance here, though, is that the hot end is very similar to a tornado. And I think that's what Tesla has managed to do, is he's created a device, a reciprocating cylinder device, that manifests a tornado at either end during each half cycle. And as one end is building up in pressure, the opposite end is vacuating itself. Likewise, when one end is evacuating its air pressure out its exit tube, the coil of wire gets charged up with a current or a voltage difference, which could be, bled out as a current. And there might be a capacitor involved, in that kind of circuitry, but I'm just looking at the geometry of the generator itself, not at the supporting circuitry. So as the air is leaving, the coil of wire gets charged up. But as the air is building, the coil of wire is discharging the EMF that had been charged up during the previous half cycle, because the coil has to go through charge and discharge, but it's opposite with reference to the air pressure in the vicinity of that coil. So as the air pressure rises, the EMF of its surrounding coil drops, and when the air pressure drops, the EMF of its surrounding coil is rising. Now on the exit of each vent, there was a one-way fluid valve that Tesla had invented. No moving parts. Now the vortex tube also has no moving parts, and although it's ascribed to somebody else, I think it was really a Tesla original design. In fact, part of the story that William Long talks about in his books, Pentagon Aliens, is that Tesla had also invented a means of very efficiently liquefying air. And that was stolen from him and immediately manifested in Germany as a German patent claim. So he adds. So I'm claiming 3 different thefts from Tesla, involving just purely air alone, not even including what happened to the special generator itself, a 4th patent idea. And all 4 have to do with the operation of this device. Now, I think I've described everything about the device that's pertinent except one last thing. The iron is very significant. We've talked about the aluminum piston and the 2 copper windings around it, and the need to insulate the interior of the iron tube that in which encapsulates the 2 tornadoes that are being artificially created alternately on either side of the aluminum piston. And that is because we've got a charged air mass that's going to be electrostatically charged. It's going to create its own electrostatic charge because it's going to be spinning. And so we don't want it to short out through the iron tube. But we do want it to charge up the aluminum piston because the spinning air mass you could consider it one side of a capacitor. You know, a capacitor has a dielectric in between, and it has 2 plates on either side of the dielectric. So I would like to think that the air leaving is going to be a similar charge to the aluminum piston, while the air entering is going to be the opposite charge. So the center of the tube maintains more or less an even charge that's opposite to either end, which alternates between the extreme opposite of the middle and neutral to middle. That's my guess during the course of one cycle. Now, the iron tube. Tesla said something very interesting. He said that for every 200 pounds of iron added to his device, 1 horsepower output would increase. Where do you put the iron? Well, I did an experiment back in 2012 in which I took a long piece of galvanized iron wire and I stuck a neomagnet to one end of it, and I stretched it out several yards, and then I went and measured with my little compass, kind of a loosey-goose measurement, just to see relative strength of magnetic field at the magnet and at the opposite end of the wire. And sure enough, I had a magnetic field along the entire length of that wire. Didn't matter how long I made it. Several yards, or a few inches or a foot. It managed to extend the magnetic field of that neomagnet all along that iron wire, that magnetizable wire. And I did the experiment because I had already read on a website called lessemf.com. They sell various materials of interest to some people, one of which is magnetic shielding. And the funny thing it said about magnetic shielding, I never knew, was that it's an acronym to call it shielding because you can't shield a magnetic field. All you can do is re-guide it in a different direction, shape it, just like a potter's hand will shape clay on the potter's wheel as it spins by pushing his hands around to reform that clay. Likewise, the geometry of iron can literally reshape a magnetic field emanating from, let's say, a permanent magnet or an electromagnet. Any shape you want based on the shape of the iron. So I thought to myself, well, this is very interesting. What if Tesla used iron to remove the magnetic field that gets generated by the coil of wire? The coil of wire is going to have an electric current generated inside of it. I'm hoping, because I'm still not sure it would be. I've never done this experiment, right? This is all head tripping. But there's a magnetic component which I would imagine would get in the way, especially when the EMF collapses, would get in the way of the electrostatic component on the interior of the tube. So it could be that Tesla wants to remove the magnetic component as quickly and efficiently as possible by having an iron encasement that keeps extending off to a limitless value in theory of how much iron you've got way off in the distance attached, magnetically coupled to this iron that's here of this tube. So that it's the mass of iron held elsewhere away from this tube, but connected to it directly to the iron tube, that creates a singular magnetic coupling such that any magnetic field of any sort that manifests here will be able to be shunted elsewhere. And that's my guess. Now, William Lyne said the purpose of the iron was to shunt away heat. And this is a phenomenon that does occur with homopolar disks or generators that lack efficiency. If they get into a non-efficient mode, instead of creating an electric current, they dissipate, they lose some of their energy in the form of heat creation. And a tornado creates heat very often. The air mass at the base of the tornado heats up. So we've got two situations again that are the same phenomenon, namely heat being generated in here, along with an electrostatic charge. And if it should have an influence of charging up this coil of wire with the help of this aluminum piston, which I'm going to get to in a minute, then we're going to have a magnetic component to that electromagnetic production that we may not want. We may just want to have the electric component that we then, bleed out to a load, a resistive load or an inductive load, to run, like an electric motor of some kind. It might be an impulse motor, but be that as it may, to run the motor of this electro U-boat that I'm surmising this was used for. Now, if we are generating an electromagnetic field that we wish to bleed away, yet is going to be here, regardless of whether it's strong, weak, or anything in between. And there's going to be something called the Bosch line, which in purely, common sense terms we can equate to the terminology of the magnetic equator. Because if the orientation of the coils are such that the north pole end of each coil is always on the right versus the south pole on the left, then we're going to have a magnetic equator down the middle, and the aluminum piston may have an impact on that magnetic equator, because there may also be an electrostatic equator in the same vicinity of the magnetic component of an electromagnetic field. And that might be where the aluminum piston comes into play, is influencing both. The fact that we recognize the existence of a magnetic equator known as the Bosch line in between the two poles of a magnet, but there may also be an electrostatic equator also in the same vicinity. And the two equators may be coupled with each other because this is an electromagnetic force and the two tend to run together. But the aluminum may be a means of leveraging the electrostatic aspect to that equator or the magnetic aspect. I don't know. Or both. That may be the purpose of the aluminum piston. We're not spinning it, although it may spin, especially if our two tornadoes run in the same direction. We may get that aluminum piston to spin in addition to reciprocally move back and forth. And that spin may be important. I overlooked that. That's right. So we'll have and it may not even be a piston. I mean, it may not be a solid piston. It might be a hollow piston. There are all kinds of technical details which may matter a lot. I don't know. It may be perforated, a perforated piston. It wouldn't be a good idea along the sides to be perforated because that would create friction losses. And compressed air may be the lubricant surrounding the sides of this piston. But there may be perforations along each end of the piston. And the piston may not be longer than it is wider in diameter. It may be just a little tiny narrow plate. And then maybe there's a plate in the middle, and instead of two plates at either end enclosing a drum shape, instead we might have just a plate in the middle for the air to act against, and then a hollow drum surrounding that plate, with the plate in the middle of that hollow drum or tube. It could be an aluminum tube, but with a divider in the middle. That could be another design possibility. In any case, I suspect it influences the Bosch line in some manner in the center of this device. That is important. But it seems to also be important that the iron carries away not merely heat buildup to improve efficiency of this device, but also magnetic buildup as well. Because we're strictly looking for current, and current is a strictly electrical phenomenon. We don't want to generate a magnetic field because we have no reason to use it, and it would just get in the way. So we want to take away that magnetic field as best we can. Now, it may not take away much, but you know what? When it comes to electrodynamics, even if we take away a little, may have a huge impact, especially when we're talking about efficiency, because that's what Nikola Tesla was referring to when he said that for every 200 pounds of iron, 1 horsepower output is increased from this device. Now, he was rating the electrical output in terms of horsepower, because that's, I'm assuming, I'm assuming the aluminum piston is not used for mechanical force. Kind of like John Bedini's rotors. I mean, they're not really a motor. He calls them gutless wonders because they really don't have a whole lot of torque. So I don't imagine this producing a whole lot of torque. I imagine it producing basically current. And we try to prevent the creation of magnetism because that'll get in the way of what purpose it serves. Now there's another... we want to upgrade or update this theory to the present era because a friend of mine, an electrician who did a job for me, said that when he used to live in the Midwest, tornado country, over a decade ago, he met somebody, a coworker, who had an intriguing device that the coworker showed off just one time. It was in the shape and size of a notebook, and it powered an electric motor. And he was very curious, so he invited the guy over for dinner, and he and his wife started to grill the guy. What is this thing? How does it work? And the only thing this guy was willing to admit to was that it involved the use of aluminum, copper, and iron. That's all he had to say, and they never saw him again. He just disappeared. So, what I'm imagining is that with the outbreak of with the onset of World War II, we managed to develop quartz crystal oscillating technology that made it possible to improve our radios in the field, infantry and whatnot. And quartz crystal oscillators, are used in all kinds of ways, such as digital clocks and digital watches. So I imagined that could be a way to do away with compressed air for this device. Just put a quartz crystal at either end of the tube, centered in the middle of a diaphragm, and attach the middle point of that diaphragm to a glass rod and another glass rod on the other side, divided in the middle by an aluminum middle portion of this sandwich. So it's a glass sandwich with aluminum in the middle, and just a thin film of aluminum separating the two glass rods from each other. What else? Everything else is the same. 2 copper windings, the iron tube encasing all of this, and the alternation of the 2 quartz crystals at either end are syncopated, so that the duty cycle of one is 180 degrees out of phase of the duty cycle of the other, so that we can get this glass rod aluminum film in the middle arrangement to reciprocate back and forth, and we can easily do this at whatever frequency we want to find the resonant frequency of the system. But we don't have to deal with compressed air. This is relatively solid state, and if the vibratory rate of this device is above the audio range of human hearing, it could run silently and you wouldn't even know it's running, because we could get it to vibrate at less than a 1/16 of an inch, at something more along the lines of what, a thousandth, a millionth of an inch, or a thousandth of a millimeter. Who knows? It would be ridiculously teensy-weensy. The linear distance of movement that the quartz crystal oscillators are imparting to the inner dynamics of this device. But it would be just enough to wiggle, to shake that Bosch line, or electrostatic Bosch line if you prefer, or electromagnetic Bosch line if you prefer, in the center between the two coils. But you'd still have the requirement of an excess of iron to take away magnetism, unless you can come up with a better magnetic shielding. And there are materials better than iron that can shield or carry away a magnetic field. So there have been improvements over that material. I forget what it's called. You can buy this stuff. Again, lessemf.com has it. But you could also have several of these tubes connected electrically in series to boost your power output, and then in between the tubes embed it in a casing of either molten iron, cast iron that you could set these into, or just fill it with packed iron filings or magnetite sand, however you choose to do it. Surely ferrite powder, or maybe not iron, maybe carbon, or maybe a mixture of carbon-rich iron. Whatever is the case, whatever works most efficiently. But it's interesting that the fellow who came up with what looks like a solid-state device, namely this notebook, he shared this with my friend while both of them were living in, I think it was Kansas or Nebraska, somewhere in the Midwest, where tornadoes do occur, with a certain amount of frequency. Now Tesla, he was a student of nature, and so I'm not at all surprised that I ran across this dissertation by Charles Chandler on the nature of tornadoes. Now let's see if I can find Charles' website to show you what it looks like. Okay, I've managed to locate it, so let's zoom in here. The electromagnetic nature of tornadic supercell thunderstorms. Charles Chandler, geophysics at charleschandler.org. And it's a PHP document, so you can select whether you want abstract, brief, or full, your images, your links. And there it is, charles-chandler.org/geophysics with a capitalized G /tornadoes with a capitalized T .php. Then he also has a place where he's done some what do you call it? Bulletin boarding, which looks like it's closed, although this bulletin board that he put together was qdl.scs-inc.us. And that's the bulletin board, the latest one for his discussion. But then he terminated it and started it someplace else. So this is the new location of where he picked up the discussion. And it shows even here he's getting some resistance to his idea that electrostatic difference between the ground and the upper atmosphere is pushing the tornado down from its parent storm. And he thinks that's the only explanation as to why it's getting pushed down. Anywho, so that's the basis for where I'm getting all of this inspiration from, is his theory about tornadoes, because no one's been able to figure out Tesla's trimetal generator. In fact, one person who is very knowledgeable in the craft of electrodynamics and physics pretty much trounced my desire to believe in William Lyne's story over a year ago, and it was a little disappointing to get it from an expert whose opinion I respect. Nonetheless, my friend doesn't lie either, and if his associate came up with a solid-state device that was more efficient per weight of device than Tesla's version, I got to go with that. So it's still a mystery that nags at me, and there are various links that helped me to better appreciate this guy's hypothesis of a tornado, one of which has to do with Bruce DePalma. So let's see if I can get the links to... oh yeah, that's a little outtake from a video I'm going to show you at the very end. It's all CGI, but it's basically, this view is from the bottom interior shaft of a tornado, and there's a little tiny tornado inside the hollow shaft, and here's a lightning bolt going down the rim of the shaft, equalizing electrical differences between the upper and lower area. And there's some people down here that are having this view, so the camera of the movie is taking the two people's viewpoint, and they're not getting zapped. Well, they're tied by leather stripes to a pipe, a water pumping pipe that goes down to a water well underground to prevent them from getting sucked up into the tornado, and it's their point of view that's allowing us to see the interior of this CGI generated tornado in the movie Twister with Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton from 1996. But that's just one little outtake from the movie, one little snapshot. Let's see if I can find the links. Let's see, here we go, somewhere. I had a lot to say on this. I started a topic on at Energetic Forum on the topic of Tesla's tri-metal generator, and it's because I've been kind of putting my attention on it on and off for the past 2 years, and it just doesn't want to go away from me. It doesn't want me to let go of it. Alright, here we go. So my post is called "The Latest Edition of Hypothesizing Tesla's Special Tri-Metal Generator," and I have various links. So this link is Chandler's link, Charles Chandler. But then for understanding the homopolar generator, I have these other links, all of which on the website distincti.com, distinti.com. And there's one on a person's viewpoint, then there's another one on the new magnetics, and then there's a forum, a Thunderbolts forum, and then there's Bruce DePalma's website, DePalma.pair.com. And that was all just to give me a background on homopolar generators, which helps me to better appreciate this thunderstorm theory of Charles Chandler. See, now we get to the good part, and I'm going to end up by showing you a movie that that is an outtake from the Twister movie. So let's see if I can back up here. And I've silenced the output because it's copyrighted music, so sorry, you'll have to watch it in silent mode. So there's the central shaft of cloud, in the middle of which is this hollow shaft. You can see the sky up above, and these lightning bolts coming down, equalizing the voltage difference between the top of the tornado and the air mass at the base of the tornado hovering just above ground level. So according to Charles Chandler, the lightning never passes current through the earth. And there we see the legs of the Bill Paxton hanging upside down, hanging straight up into the air. All these lightning strikes are equalizing the difference between two air masses and do not involve the earth. That is according to what Charles Chandler is stating. This little excerpt is only 54 seconds long, so it should terminate in a few seconds. It has nice music, but I can't show it, you know. I mean, I put it on my public website, but yes, why don't Well, let's see. What can I show you? I can show you the link to this energetic forum post. So we've got energeticforum.com, renewable-energy/1989-5-Teslas-special-tri-metal-generator-2, although there is a first page without the -2, .html. And then there's now a -3 as well. Yeah, I think I've shown you everything I want to show you and describe everything I can possibly decipher in this situation. So, yeah, okay.